you didn't, but I'll let you off this time. We are going to talk about resumes today. We're going to spend probably like the most time building some fundamental understandings about resumes, why we have to have them, how they get used, and especially these like two very different scenarios that they get used. Then talk about a couple things to yes do and a couple things to not do in the resumes. And then finally kind of deliver a bit on the promise of the overall session of like looking at some templates. And I want to look at some templates that I think are not good enough and highlight for you like why they're not good, and then look at some templates that I think are pretty good. I am not exactly going to give you a like, here, just do this. I might in the future, but that's not today. So we're going to leave you with like some thoughts or ways to interpret things. And I think it would be interesting, of course, I always appreciate when people just take notes in general. I think it would be interesting along the way to have your own resume open so you can be kind of like asking yourself questions or making thoughts about things. Okay, so that's the overall plan. Let's get started. So in the modern market, it is very difficult for a resume to win you a job, but it's pretty easy for it to lose one. The resumes are generally like a need to have, a have to have, a necessary step of the process. In your scenario, as a person entering the industry or maybe looking for a second job or whatnot, you cannot craft a resume that has any statistical likelihood of people being like, oh, fuck, get Dana in here right fucking now. Like, hired, done. No offense, Dana, right? But it's like, it's just not really possible. Even when you have more experience, the goal of the resume is not really to get you a job, it's to get you an interview. And so as we think about resumes, it's like they're important, but they're also not enough. I don't want you to get the impression that like, this is going to do the job for me, get me into the job. Most professional jobs require a resume, which means many people have written resumes, many people have read resumes, and so everybody's got fucking opinions about them. Those opinions are going to vary across like organizations, across individuals in the organizations, different life cycles of an individual organization. They're going to vary for the individuals who apply and like where they are in their own career. Like a resume for a career switcher is going to necessarily be different and read different than somebody who's been in the job, been in that domain for 5 or 10 years. There's some stupid thing I've heard said more than once, which is like, Bill Gates's resume is only 1 page. And it's like, oh, who do you think Bill Gates fucking writing a resume for? Okay, get this anecdote out of my face. A lot of like people are in different places in their life, in their career, applying to different jobs at different companies. And so there is a lot of space for interpretation. So there'll be things maybe I'll say today that other people would disagree with. That's fine. You can disagree too, and then go get a job and then come back and be like, ha, I showed you. Cool. I'm into it as long as you get the job. So I guess that means like take everything with a grain of salt, but I have spent a lot of time with resumes over the years, too much time. And so this is all like based on my reading experience, etc. I don't have a doctorate in resumes. So what you want a resume to do is to trigger a conversation. Essentially, like a person reading your resume is asking themselves the question, like, is this person worth my time? It's not, should we hire this person? It's just like, is it worthwhile to have a conversation about it? To get to that point where that question is asked or answered, the resume itself has to get to a person. And so I want to talk about these like 2 possible paths of how someone gets to your resume. Number 1 is the public application, right? The most obvious way or the most obvious path is when you apply for a job. You see a job listing, you apply for that job. You go through the steps, often frustratingly, even in the modern era, you're like uploading a resume, and also it feels like retyping it into a bunch of text fields and so forth. That's quite common. Either way, in 2023, you're typically working with an ATS system, which is an applicant tracking system. Almost any job you apply for is going to use an ATS because it used to be 5 years ago, so they were like big and complicated and expensive to set up. And there are a lot of options now. They're not that hard to build from a software standpoint. And so there are ATSs that are specialized by different industries. There are ATSs that are like meant for little companies and big companies and so forth. So there are a lot of options. They're not that expensive. Pretty much everyone uses them. Even we use ATS. A few years ago, those tools were really meant, and like the problem they were solving was just organizing candidates. If you posted a mid-level technical job, you would get a couple dozen applicants per month. And the ATS was an alternative to like organizing stuff through email or through a spreadsheet. It organizes the data, keeps track of who's at what stage of the pipeline, and provides like a centralized place to keep notes. So like different interviewers who talk to a candidate or have email interactions or whatever, it can all get centralized into the ATS. It's basically like a project management system, just of applicants. Over the last couple of years, those systems have become a little more active in the process, especially around kind of pre-screening of applicants. There is a lot of mystery, secret juju, and like disagreement about how active those systems are in the review process. I'm going to give you like my perspective, which I think is true. See if someone else disagrees. Recruiters and folks in hiring will say that their ATS doesn't filter out candidates, that every candidate, every applicant is human reviewed. And this, it reminds me of like when you go to the grocery store and foods have like all these words on it, and you're like, I'm not sure that word means what they want me to think it means. Like you're a cage-free chicken, but you're also like packed in with a billion other chickens in like 2 yards of space. Like there's no cage, but it's not like you're living a good life out here just cranking out these eggs. I think when people about these ATS systems, they say things that are technically true, but don't quite live up to what the impression their comments give. If in the like modern or advanced ATS systems, they're going to do things like automatically give a fit score or a likelihood of fit or whatever. They're going to do proactive processing. You can think of it maybe as like a percentage of 0 to 100. Every application that comes in, it's going to do some scan of the job listing and the resume and try and assess the match and then give you a numeric score. If you are a recruiter or an HR person and you get 500 applicants for a position, probably the very first thing you're going to do is review the applications of everyone with lower than a 90% fit score and mark them as rejected. Like click, scroll, shift, click, rejected, boom. I reviewed all of them. The ATS didn't do that. I reviewed them. Like, okay, it's not like you went through the impression people want to make is like, oh, we review every candidate. We're reading those resumes. They are not. Like if the ATS gives you a low score, like they're not spending the time to be like, oh, maybe there's a diamond in the rough here with this 40% fit. Maybe at the margins, if even in a big pool, if it's like there aren't that many people in a 90+%, okay, now maybe the 80 to 90, we're going to click through them real quick and see if they should get pulled in. But if you're not getting a high score from the ATS review, like you're not getting interviewed for that job. No one's going to find out that the ATS was wrong. basically, or that the ATS like missed things. This is a major reason why spraying and praying applications doesn't work very well. If you're going to consistently get filtered out at the first stage, your odds of success in getting those jobs is 0. I think applicants can sometimes get pissed off in the application processes. It is rude. A lot of times you don't even get a rejection, which is like annoying and rude. I'm not going to argue against that. And also, I think it's easy for interviewees, applicants, to overlook just how much work goes into hiring people and trying to find the right people out of a big pool. If you think about like a process that goes well, you apply, you probably then do a phone screen with like a non-technical person, and then you probably do a culture fit interview with a technical person. You probably do a technical interview with a technical person, and then there's some final round of consideration among the candidates who went through all those. For a single candidate, it would be perfectly normal for the company to spend a total of about 8-10 hours evaluating and scheduling, doing all the coordination and so forth across multiple individuals for just one candidate. If you did that for 500 candidates, it would be about 2 years of work. If you evaluated 100 candidates out of 500, it would still take almost 6 months of like people power. The business is hiring in the first place because they have more work than people. So where are you going to get 6 months of time to evaluate your top 100 candidates? Like, it's just unreasonable and not going to happen. That's why, really, despite the size of the applicant pool, the first task is to filter down to like between 5 and 30 candidates. Typically more like 5 to 12, 5 to 18, at least for the phone screen. Now, at that point, you're talking about like 200 hours work. And when you filter some folks out after the phone screen, now you're down to like maybe 5 to 12 who advance to actual technical people for their interview processes. And so the real investment total is like 100 hours time of people time. If you want to win in that process, then your resume and cover letter have to put you in the top 30 applicants, no matter how big the pool is, or else your chances are essentially 0. The ATS systems have advanced in reasonable ways, and it's not like black magic, like totally unpredictable how a resume matches to the job description. It looks for keywords and phrases. It assigns them a score based on that, right? So it's like, we're hiring for this. We've prioritized like this specific language or framework, or we've prioritized experience, we prioritize the degree, et cetera. And then the ATS is going to like weight each of those independently by those settings and then spit out the score. Honestly, I think if you use like ChatGPT and fed in a job description and then gave it your resume and asked it to assess how well your resume fits that job description, you're going to get out a pretty answer like pretty similar to what an ATS is going to say. It's not like rocket science. As we a little bit later today talk about the template and like the design of the resume, when you're thinking about these ATS systems and targeting the ATS systems, like you can't document experience you don't have, right? Like you can't change your credentials, but you can make sure that it's read properly, that it's clean, clear, and really simple, so that those automated tools like parse it well. Second whole path, so that was the ATS path. Second whole path is what I call the interested party. The best way to have someone look at your resume is for them to give a shit about you and your resume, to have already decided that you're a person they're like somewhat interested in. Maybe for them to ask for it and like want it, the resume, when they receive it. This typically happens because, number one, you're like a referral from someone in the company has said like, hey, you need to check this person out. They're great. Second, you have talked with them directly, the recruiter, ahead of time. Or third, a hard one is like the position is somehow so niche or obscure that there are very small pool of applicants, but there are only 5 people, 8 people, 10 people in consideration. Then they're not really relying on these automated processes. It's just like, okay, we'll just evaluate each one. Sometimes in those scenarios, you're still applying through an ATS. So don't think that like, just because you encounter an ATS system that you're automatically out or anything like that. In these scenarios, you're typically getting some kind of special flag. You're flagged as a referral. You're flagged as like a person, a candidate of interest. You're flagged, whatever, some saving checkbox that keeps you from that initial culling of 500 down to 30. The best thing about this path is that when a person is looking at your resume, they're really asking different questions than the ATS path. The ATS was asking like, or the automated, step of the ATS was asking, does this person have the indicators that they can potentially do the job? When a person is evaluating it, they already have some impression of you, even if it's just like you were referred by some random person. They're already like a little bit on your side. And they're going to come into the resume review essentially thinking like, we want this person to move to an interview phase. Are there any red flags? So it's like the ATS version, you're really trying to build up to the interview, like, see, I should get interviewed because of this. And in the person version, it's like you're going into it headed for an interview. Just don't fuck it up. That's a lot better position to be in. When I say like resume can't win you a job, but can you lose you one? I'm really like thinking mostly about this second scenario. You can't have simple things like spelling or grammar errors. Your links have to work. You have to like demonstrate your professional competency, which obviously no one intends to leave those things there. It is hard when you spend a lot of time with these documents. It's easy to miss things. And that's where I think review from other people is super critical, whether it's like friends or it is folks on the Turing staff working with Tracy, et cetera. Like even just having a thing of like, hey, let's 5 of us get together, rotate resumes, and click every link on the resume and make sure it goes where you thought it was going to go. And it'll take you like 10 minutes and somebody will be like, wait a sec, fuck, right? Like that's the kind of stuff you just like can't afford to make those little mistakes because unfortunately, like people judge them quite harshly. The resume is like when a person is reviewing your resume, you are empowering them with the information to advocate on your behalf and for them to not look bad. The thing that a recruiter fears, particularly, or an HR person or hiring manager or whatever, they don't want to look dumb and they don't want to get fired from their job. So if you come back to the scenario of like, why is a company hiring a developer? Why are they hiring a junior developer, a mid-level developer in the first place? It's because like they're trying to grow. They have more work than the people they have right now. And so the people time of the people they have is very precious. If a recruiter, for instance, were like, hey, technical team, here's 100 people that seem pretty decent. You should interview them. The technical team is going to be like, no, we don't have that kind of time, right? Similarly, if the recruiter is like, hey, here's like 20 candidates, I included a couple who I just thought were nice, they're going to be like, no, we don't have time. We don't have time for people that you're not like pretty sure have the skills to do the job. The nightmare scenario for a recruiter is for the technical people to interview folks and then to come back to the recruiter and be like, what the fuck were you wasting our time for? Like this person had no chance of success. And so that's how a recruiter then starts to like endanger their job, right? When you think about what are the, you know, key performance indicators, KPIs that like someone like a recruiter would measure. If you were managing a recruiter, what things would you measure? It's like, what percentage of jobs get hired in a expected period of time, like within 45 days, right? What percentage of referred candidates internally move on to later stages of the interview? These kinds of things. So recruiters are significantly disincentivized from like just giving people a shot. And that when you're that person looking for the shot, that can be like frustrating, understandably, but you're essentially asking them to risk their job, which is, they're not willing to do that. They don't know you. They're not willing to do that. They're trying to make sure that if you move into the interview process, you're strong enough to be worth it. Even if the team doesn't decide to hire you for the role, the team's feedback has to be that it was worth the discussion, right? And it is something that thankfully happens a lot with grads in interview processes when they don't get the job, is the feedback they get is like, hey, you seem great. Like, you're just not quite what we need right now. But would you come back in like 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, and like come join the team? Nobody looks bad in that scenario. It's just like the evaluation process went well. You just couldn't quite reach what they were looking for, but everybody's happy, right? So with the ATS system, you're trying to make sure you have the keywords, the organization, the bits to get your little score as high as you can get it. With the recruiter, you're looking to make an argument. You're looking really to equip them with the argument of like, here's why this person's worth the discussion. Your opportunity in the resume is to then like communicate, is to give them the words, give them the data, give them the information to use. I think about it sometimes as like connecting the dots, you know, for people, or like laying out the dots and connecting them. You want your resume to put the dots really fucking close together so everybody can connect them and not be like, here's a dot, here's a dot, here's a dot. And this is unfortunately what a lot of resumes do, is like, here's several dots of information. Hope you can make a picture. And it's like, I'm not in the picture making business. Like, you got to make the picture, give it to, like, tell me what picture I'm making. So then as we think about like the template, how do you like put these thoughts into action? I have a lot of like conflicted feelings about this, to be honest, over the years, because most people make their resumes from scratch. I kind of think maybe we should just have like 3 templates and it's like, pick one, just fucking fill your shit in and don't mess it up. We haven't taken that approach yet. But how do you build content and a template that like can succeed in both these different scenarios? You'll find people with all kinds of different opinions. Here are a couple rules based on what I have seen for you. Okay. Rule number 1, it's got to be 1 page. I have not encountered a single alum where I looked at a multi-page resume and said like, yes, this is better than a 1-page resume. It's typically folks who are like more advanced in their career, maybe are in their 40s and 50s, and are like, but I got to document all these things. And it's an understandable impulse, but the reality is like, for you as a career changer into this tech industry, a longer resume is just saying the same things over and over. It's like re-inking the same dot. It's already made. Like what you did 10 plus years ago probably isn't the thing that's going to move the needle and get you from 82% to 84% or whatever. So it's got to be 1 page. Number 1. Number 2, like a cultural variation in Europe, for instance, common and sometimes even required. I read in like some Asian countries, like very much required. In the US, no photos on the resume. The photo on the resume is setting you up, or some of them up, for potentially some perception of like discrimination. of like, you saw my photo, you saw I'm a lady, you don't hire any ladies, so blah, blah, I'm suing you now. Don't put a photo on the resume. Now you're like, wait, aren't they also going to look at my LinkedIn, and my LinkedIn has a photo on it? Yes, they are. So the whole thing is a sham. Okay. Regardless, the rule is no photo on the resume. Don't do it. Number 3, if you are a designer, and I don't mean a front-end engineer, if you are a designer, the design of your resume is not gonna like do you a lot of favors. It needs to be like clean. If you're not a designer, it needs to be clean, not like crafty, not like, ooh, what's this weird graph of like your competency and different skills and so forth. Like, no one wants that. No flourish, very little use of color, right? Because if you think about things like color, with the ATS is getting you nowhere. And some people, if it's me, if I am hiring people, like I do print shit out. And so it's going to come out black and white anyway. It's kind of a loss. I think also sometimes people end up misusing color and like highlighting the wrong things. I'll show you some of that in some of these templates. Rule number 4 is that it is impeccably readable. Simple fonts, reasonable sizes, nothing cute, nothing crafty, nothing in fucking cursive and stuff. Just like, it has to be impeccably readable. One example I looked at the other day, a student, I think they were in mod 4, or maybe they just graduated now. The whole resume was in like a fixed width font, which is like the kind of font you would use in a text editor. And I was like, why did you use this god awful font? And they're like, oh, because it's like a programming thing. I was like, it's horrible. Like, no one wants to read a fixed width font of a page of text. Like, just use a normal writing font. And then 5th, perhaps the like hardest one, is to accept and understand that your resume is for scanning, not for reading. It's got to be like brief and to the point, because it's not, someone does not take it and read one line at a time from the top to the bottom. They're going to come at it and go like, who's this? They're scanning quickly. Another thing we're going to look at in some templates is like thinking about eye patterns and how people miss things, and like zigzagging. I don't know if you've ever seen this or heard this in web development. There are libraries and so forth you can use to track your user's eye movement on the page. And it's super interesting to see these like heat maps of what do people look at in a given layout. Same thing, very much true on a resume. Like, if the eyes have to zigzag, they're traveling too far. Like, if you think about the linear distance of going like this way, this way, this way, this way, it's way farther than if you just go top to bottom. And so you want to make things easy to scan so that they're seeing the most important things along the way, brief and to the point. And the challenge with all this of like short, is that you still have to communicate why things matter. It's not so much about what you did, you know, like, I think Dana and Nicole, y'all were, and Antoine, we were all doing like LinkedIn earlier this week. You know, it's easy in these scenarios to talk about like what things you did in a job. No one really cares when they're reading that resume, because those things are not the things that they do. What they care about is really like, why did you do them? What was the purpose? What was the outcomes? Because when it's like, you know, I managed a restaurant, it's been around 10 years, like, okay. When it's, I managed a team of 28 part-time staff and delivered $10 million in revenue, it's like, we also have staff and we make revenue. You should come do that here, right? And it's like, it's the same story, but one of them is talking about the what, and one of them is talking about the like the why and the outcomes. And those outcomes are what's really going to shine. From your past roles, the main point, as best you can, is to communicate that you carried responsibility, that you delivered on that responsibility, and people like working with you and don't hate your guts. If any of those things are not true, then you just got to like polish it up the best you can, right? But it's like, I had responsibilities, it's especially well demonstrated when those responsibilities increase over time. So like there's a lot of value, and it's like I moved from server to shift manager to restaurant manager. It's like, okay, so each thing you were successful enough that people were willing to rely on you for more. That's a excellent thing to communicate. From your projects, from your technical projects, it's really the same thing. You're trying to communicate that you've worked in different and uncertain circumstances. You've learned and figured out hard things, and people are willing to collaborate with you. Maybe even they like collaborating with you. One little word to emphasize in there that like I hear about from employers is the uncertainty. What we talked earlier this week about like making projects, turning good projects into great projects, and a two-sided coin. A good and bad thing for you is that there are a tremendous number of learning resources out there, right? If whatever technology you want to learn, there are some half decent blog posts, videos, articles, books, etc. to learn it. The downside of that is a lot of people do those things, and then they're like, hey, look at this thing I built. It's totally amazing. I built a, e-commerce shopping cart. As the slightly cynical reviewer or interviewer, it's like, oh, you probably just followed a tutorial. It probably showed you like every line to type and you went through and typed it. Cool. But it's not like, wow. All it shows me is you can follow directions, which is not really that's pretty low level expectations for a programmer. Right. So when the reason tutorials and tutorial projects are not respected is because they don't involve any uncertainty. And so when you talk about your projects or when you document your projects and so forth, one of the things you want to emphasize about them is that there was an uncertainty here. We didn't know what we were building. We set out to build it like this. It turned out we went this way, or we wanted to do things this way. We had to figure out, it turned out this couldn't work. And so we had to figure out something else, because those parts look like the real work. Those parts sound like, hey, can you guys not bang stuff around, please? Those parts look like the real job, particularly for a junior or mid-level engineer, where it's like, nobody's laying out for you 87 steps to follow. It's like, go make a thing kind of like this, but we're not totally sure. Okay. Then lastly, for your skills, I think a skills block in the resume is perhaps the most disagreed upon element of the resume. I used to be against it. I slowly changed that opinion over time. I was reading something yesterday from a very respected person that was saying like, your skills are the most important thing on your resume and they belong at the top. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't think I can. I can't. I hear what you're saying, but like I can't quite get there. The skills section is a tricky balance because you have to show that you have the basic understandings and familiarities to be worth investing the interview time in. And also like keyword cramming isn't that great. And everybody knows it. When you see this like block of text and it's just like 800 words crammed, small font, tiny spaces, like, okay, you are really targeting the ATS system here. I think the skills part is one that you should be customizing for almost every company to make sure that the skills most relevant to what they've asked for are first in the list. Because if it's got 8 or more elements in it, they're probably not reading the whole thing. And so whatever their job description is asking for, especially if you phrase it in as close as you can to what was in the job description, now you're doing well. Like now, I think you're both succeeding with the ATS evaluation approach and you're succeeding with the person approach. A challenge for you, I think whether you're doing front end or back end launch, but especially for backend folks. A lot of backend folks get jobs that are not exactly the technology stack they learned in backend, right? And so when you come in and you're like, hey, I know Ruby and Rails, and then people are like, oh, we're hiring Python Django. Out, you know. The technical distance between Python Django and Ruby and Rails is like near zero. It's like an incredibly simple transition. But if you're an HR person, you might not know that. Or one time I passed on a candidate who was a Ruby and Rails person, and then the Python Django team was like, how dare you waste our time with this, da 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 da, because it turned out they didn't even know Ruby and Rails. They didn't know anything. When you can, you want to adapt the skill section to be as similar to the job description as possible. Again, this idea of like connect the dots, like get those dots as close as humanly possible so that the person has to do almost no interpretation to go like, oh, you got that thing and that thing and that thing. Great. Now, where I think you can take that a little bit controversially, I don't think you should lie on your resume. Sometimes you got to polish up the truth a little bit. And so if it is like, yeah, I'm doing backend, and in mod 4, I've been doing Ruby and Rails my whole programming life for 6 out of 7 months. And the last 3 weeks I did some Python work and I'm applying for a Python job, like those Python skills are coming first in the list, right? You can allow, I think the like burden of proof falls to the interviewers. And it's not like you're gonna create lies to the extent where like, you know, some George Soros situation, 3 months into your job, people are like, wait a minute, you said you had this degree, you didn't even go to school, you know, like you're not doing that shit. Like you're just trying to get the best out of the work you've done and the skills you have, right? And if I think there's a little space for like artistic interpretation in the resume. For instance, if you are back at that restaurant example, and in your resume, you don't have enough physical space to fit that you went from server to shift manager to restaurant manager, then it's like, just say restaurant manager. And it was 5 years of restaurant manager, and no one's gonna be like, wait a second, you were hired directly as a restaurant manager? Let me go back and call your former colleagues. In fact, like it just doesn't, those details don't matter, right? If someone actually cares, they can ask you about it. And you're like, yeah, I started out as a server, I moved up to restaurant manager. And they're like, okay, move on. Antoine, question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. With regard to skills and kind of getting a little bit more granular, I've heard people are putting like a currently learning section for things. And I'm wondering with that specifically, like if you know, for example, that the jump from Django to Rails is like not that big, could you apply to that position and be like, okay, if I get a response from this, I am then going to start like more heavily learning this specific language and put that on your resume. Like, I'm currently learning this, or like I will be if you talk to me.
Yeah.
Is that how does that approach it with you?
Yeah, I saw it and I got
if it's me,
I
am, you know, how does it go? There's some like meme. There was some phrase like a couple of years ago, like, let us all approach our job hunt with the confidence of an underqualified middle-aged white man. And that's me, right? So if I'm going into that application, I'm just saying like, yeah, I know this. If I'm not going like, oh yeah, I'm kind of a little bit 1 foot into learning these things. I'm about to learn this. I'm doing this. It's just like, I know it. And if I get to the spot where I'm going to have to prove it, it's like, now I'm going to try and back it up. Now, like the interview is not going to be like, okay, this afternoon, prove it. You know, it's like Tuesday. You're like, all right, I got 96 hours. Like I can get far enough pretty fast. So I think most students and grads tend to undersell their expertise, right? And it was some of the little stuff we were talking about with the LinkedIn, right? It was like, just take the student part out, just take the learning part out, just believe that you are that person, even if it feels like it's 6%, 8% out from where you are already. Like just claim that space. And then if you have to defend it, like work your ass off and go defend it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Thanks.
All right. Cool. That's all my talk notes. I want to look at a couple resume things and why I think you should or shouldn't do them. Where's my correct window here? Beep, boop, boop, boop.
Okay.
Here we go.
I'm gonna be done with this admin, please.
All right. I asked this yesterday, but I just want to double check. Like you can see my mouse moving over if I go in like a little circle like this. Can you see it or no? Okay. Only, oh, Antoine and Nick can see. Okay, great. So I pulled up this resume IO. You know, you can Google like a bunch of different resume sites and find different things. If we go for the all templates, I hope it already jumps out to you that there are like a lot of things I just told you not to do, like photos on both of these. This one has what I would consider like a lot of unnecessary colors and so forth. This blacking of the titles is like way overdone and just horrifyingly ugly. Here, you know, this Sophie one, they got a photo on it. They've got this color and so forth. It's not like horrible. It's like just no. This Toronto one is like pretty solid, I would say, and it's simplicity and is fair for y'all. These kinds of things like, why is this line here? Like people don't know how to read, you know, you're just creating unnecessary noise. Underlining all these skills, no. Like it, number one, it's not an underline. It doesn't go the whole, it looks like a fucking optical illusion, you know, where it's like, which of these lines is the longest kind of thing. It's just unnecessary. References down here, no. You don't, no references on the resume. Languages, nope, unless it's like somehow relevant to the business, like we were talking about internationalization and so forth yesterday. Really bright colors, more photos, like just, it's hard because I think you can get like easily misled in that these are maybe things that are good in other industries, in other times, for maybe different experience levels and so forth. Like most of these are not good templates for you. Oh my God, this,
Now,
I'm just like instant trash if I printed this shit out. So then what do you yes do? I have looked around. I read a book over intermission all about resumes, and I was very much like vibing with what the book had to say. And after this whole 200-page book, they were like, oh, we collaborated with this one little company that does a resume builder. And I looked at the resumes and I was like, these things are hot. I like it. So I'm going to show it to you. I'm not trying to say like, oh, you need to go sign up for this company and pay them money or whatever. Maybe you choose to, or maybe you choose to just steal their ideas because I think they're pretty good. It's called Standard Resume. It's like a little 3-person company. And their whole deal is they have templates. You enter in your information, it generates the resume. And then they do like a hosted thing where you download a PDF, but you also get a URL and then it's like mobile accessible, so forth, which I don't know. I like genuinely have no idea if people are reading resumes on mobile, but I just thought it was like an interesting idea. So if you compare like some of the things we're seeing here to here, right? It's like no photo. There's no, like in just this first Sydney one here, there's no unnecessary lines or flourish. And where does it draw your eye, right? The eye in here in this Matt Vaughn example is drawn to like, not the words work experience, it's drawn to the work experience itself, right? If you come back here, look at this, like look at employment history in like fucking 28 font or something. It's like, yeah, I know you have an employment history. You're burning 6% of the vertical space just on the words employment history versus you come here, It's like work experience, super small. As if we couldn't understand what these things, if you didn't even have work experience, we would still know what these things were. Right. So it's like, that's smart. That's good typography. It's good use of space. Really nice consistency here in the, like, all the jobs have the company capitalized, have the job title is in the left column. So if you look at like a 2-column, let's look here. Okay. Like at this Sophie Wright one. If you come to the top of the page and you're like, okay, Sophie's a lady, and then she's in New York. Now from here, how do you read this? Do you go over here and start reading details and then probably go like, I actually don't give a shit about any of this. Let me go back over here to profile. And now I'm reading here. And now I'm reading employment history. Oh, dang. Sorry, I clicked on it. And now I'm here. And then I'm probably starting to lose interest in that. And I'm jumping back up here to see what these skills are. And me personally, I'm wondering why there's all these horizontal rules in here. And then I'm maybe back down. It's just like a zigzag back and forth. In a format like this, you're starting at the top. You're like, boop, boop. I don't care about location. This intro thing is another little part that I personally really believe in. I call it like a micro cover letter. I think you should spend some of your white space in a 2, 3, 4 sentence argument of like why you want this job. Essentially, if the resume had to stand on its own without a cover letter or other application, then that little bit of text helps give a context of like, who are you, what job you're applying for, and why you think you deserve a shot at it. So I love this. If you notice subtle things here, like the use of some, it's not really color between black and gray are the same color, but it gives a little bit of variation here. Simple bullets, 2, 3 bullets kind of thing, get the degree, get the skills. Now you could argue like, do we need these gray boxes on the skills? Probably not. But like this to me is like a super clean kind of template that you could pay these folks to do this, or you could implement a very similar thing in like Google Docs or whatever. Similarly, here is another one. It's like just a little bit different style, but a lot of the same elements. Like you see a bit of color here, I think gives like a nice pop without being overdone. Blue is a little bit of a tricky color because, right, it like implicitly makes you think about links. And obviously these are things you're not linking, but I think it's probably the most like neutral, non-gray to use. It's got the essentials up here. It's got space. Maria could fit a couple more words up in this spot as like the micro cover letter, get into the work. For you, it's like your projects are probably going to come first and then your work second, and then education and then skills, I would guess, is going to be your layout. But again, it's like simple, clear, parses super easy. Any software that's trying to read this PDF is going to get all the right words out of it, versus like some of these, you know, I fucking hate things like these little graphs. I'm 3/4 excellent communication skills. Well, if excellent is 3/4, what's the full circle? Fucking out of this world or whatever. Like, it's just dumb stuff that people make up. And then they're like, ooh, it's so cute. There's not ones. Wow. Absolutely no. This stuff, like, can you imagine? Like if you're doing, like look at the word lessons right here. If you can see it, see how this weird background square overlaps with the L. Now you're creating like graphical parsing problems for the technology that's trying to read the software, because there's all this distracting text. It's like a CAPTCHA challenge. Like, don't do it. Clean, simple parses. I love it. Those are a couple of their simple ones. This professional one, Parker, we looked at that one already. It's like all these, they're all kind of the same ideas. Like they're essentially one column, at least one content column. You could technically call this 2 columns, but this is like a labeling column and this is a content. And so if you're reading content, you're just going top to bottom in one line. Love it. Simple fonts. Okay, did I look at the creative ones? Creative ones, I don't love so much. They're still pretty clean, but it's like red. Red's a weird color for your resume text. Even this one as like a creative, this is still just like so fucking simple and straightforward. And like everyone's going to get it. Anyone, whether it's the ATS or it's a person that looks at it, is going to get it. So it's like top to bottom, simple fonts, no flourish. Don't do the wrong things. Yes, do the right things. If you do pay people money, or you're like, Jeff, you should pay money on my behalf, I'll think about it. I'll say if y'all could bother to come chat with me today and you want to use it, then I'll pay for it. Or just like steal these ideas and implement it your own. The one last little thing I want to mention is I see some people make mistakes with their resume in making it hard to work with. And one of the things we do here over and over, or I've said to you more than once, is like you should be customizing your resume per job application. If the resume itself is hard to manipulate, now that's slowing you down every job application. So if you're doing, if you're starting with like Figma and everything is like a floating text box, now when you change the size of one text box, now you got to go like drag a bunch of other text boxes around and so forth. Like that is not a good setup. I think you either want to implement in a specialized tool that does layout for you, or in a publishing tool, even if that's Google Docs or Microsoft Word or whatever, where you have a degree of reasonable like flow and overlap, and you can control all those things, as opposed to like a graphic design tool. Like, please don't build your resume in Adobe Illustrator, or, okay, I'm not super expert in Figma and so forth, but like a vector-based design tool is not a good choice for a resume. You're building text. Make it easy to work with. All right. I have used up all of our time per usual. If there are questions I can answer right now, happy to answer that. I have a couple minutes, so I don't have to stop right at 1. If you do have to stop right at 1, thanks for coming. If not, questions, feedback, thoughts, I'm ready. But you have to say them with your real face, not with your typey type text, because I already heard enough of my own voice. Nick.
I have to make this quick because I actually have to leave at 1. But when it comes to a 1-page resume, and if you have like a lot of experiences, would it be better to kind of curtail like a story for the employer through like a summary, or would it be better to like possibly do that in the professional experience section if you had to choose one or the other?
Yeah. I think the question I would ask is like, what value are you demonstrating through those experiences, right? And like, what is it about them that maps to this job I'm applying for? And so then if I know that, and it's like, I can demonstrate I, was in a similar industry to what they work in, they're doing health tech. I used to be in health, whatever. Or I'm trying to demonstrate my professionalism and my managerial experience and all those kinds of things. Like whatever it is that you're trying to demonstrate, answer that question first. And then I think it'll be more clear of like where that fits. The answer is probably in that like micro cover letter, and down below, I think past experience can get just like, it can even get to 1 line if you had a bunch of jobs, right? Where it's like shift manager, this place, team manager, this place, boom, 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 and some dates. And then if people care, they'll ask. But it's unlikely that there's anything in there 8-10 years ago that they read one bullet point and they're like, oh, that's the guy, get him in. So I think up at the top.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck. Anything else for questions, y'all? Antoine.
Do you want to grill my resume real quick, or do you not have time?
Ooh. I love it. Let's do it.
All right. I just sent it in the chat.
Boom. All right, I'm gonna screen share it. A little thing that I read in this book that I thought was kind of like an interesting point is to take care of the naming of your resume. And it is common that I'll get resumes and stuff where it's like professional resume, parenthesis 1 close paren revised underscore final dot PDF, you know, and it like, it just doesn't look super great. When you're sending this, just be conscientious of like what the title ends up being, or if you're like downloading it as a PDF, then name it like your last name, first name, company name that you're applying to .pdf. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Overall, like my first impression is I like it. My second thought is like, okay, there's a lot of bold, but like, let me see how I feel about it as I get into it. I like that software engineer like pops up early. Your name and software engineer, they look kind of different, but not different enough for me. So I think your name is actually not black and the rest of this is black. And so I just want them like differenter or the same. And this is just kind of like, I'm like a typography nerd, like type and layout and fonts and stuff like that. Other people might not react as much. So it's a space where I think with your name being large, I like it in the non-black. I guess I'm gonna come back to the software engineer part. I'm gonna simmer on that a little bit. I like all these things, you know, for instance, I like in here that you have Salt Lake City and nobody's like, which Salt Lake City, right? So it's like, you don't have to put the state on there. You don't need to put your home address. No one's mailing you stuff. I like the consistency of the headers, the skills, recent projects, experience, and education. That looks good. It is like visually, it's heavy on the left side, right? Now we read starting on the left. So like, that's not a terrible thing. But if you were measuring like the ink that's used on the page, the majority of it is in this area right here. Like there's a lot of visual weight on that left side. So as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking a little bit about like, okay, are there places we could do without the bolding? The one that does jump out to me is probably on these 4 lines. I would at least want to see it without bolding the label. I would capitalize the second word as language, frameworks, tools, technologies, and principles. I like that. I think the lists are like not too long and not too short. They're not unreadable or anything like that. Languages, tools, technologies, methodology. I'd probably flip and put methodologies, principles before. Currently learning. I might think about putting it as, if I was making the label, I guess I would say, I don't know. I was going to say like areas of interest, but I don't know if that's better. I'm just simmering on it a little bit. You don't have to say basics, just say Amazon Web Services, AWS. In the recent projects, when I first read it, I kind of did a double take on recent projects, and I was, all right, I'm into it. It's like, these aren't just like stale projects from some time in the past. With projects, one of the concerns that comes up is like, how do I know you even did anything? What if your group just carried you, right? I think it is at least interesting. I wouldn't say it's correct for everybody, but I think it's interesting to put a little bit of detail in here. One of the things I hear over and over is people liking metrics, like kind of vanity metrics. And so, for instance, it's like Pantry Pilot you did with a team of 4 and you worked on for 2 weeks, and you put in like, you each put in, let's say 6 hours a day. So now we're talking about 24 work hours per day over 2 weeks. So we call it 240 work hours, right? And so, yeah, I like I like this. I like where you're going with it. And I would say like 80 work hours, you know, or you can count everybody's work hours and they'll be like, damn, you did all that. And you're like, well, it was the 4 of it. Oh, okay, that's fine. So I would say, yeah, 240 work hours. And now it's just like, oh, you invested some shit in this. This wasn't just like a Saturday you did a tutorial kind of thing. I like the way these bullets are stated. Past tense, they're like action oriented. This, instead of personal photos, just say photo assets. This, I don't know if like a non-developer would know what this means. So I would probably rephrase this overall line to automated software testing for both success and failure cases.
I just let myself a little note to rephrase that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. I like this one. Yeah. And see, I think like your layout here is good because what's most important about this job is the senior director part. Where it was really matters so much less. It's just like communicating, like, someone put me in charge of shit. I'm like, oh, did they do it for a while? Okay, cool. Yep. And I know we like talked about this stuff. I think you added this in since we last looked at it. And that's kind of interesting.
Leverage, because it's kind of like what's interesting about this company I work for. It's like a climbing gym fitness, you know, thing, and we use like agile and like had sprints and did Scrum every day and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to like really leverage that in the job search and having a hard time making it like really pop on my resume. So
yeah, I think they're really good. This one has like an extra white space underneath it that the other ones don't. But I think the experience section is really good. Yep, I think this is good. Yeah, the piece, I think the what's always hard for me to think about is like what's not here. I think I would work on pulling, it can be a little annoying in Google Docs, but I think you can push this header up and have like less space at the top up here. And if you have a little bit less space at the top, a little bit less space at the bottom, in between your contact details and your skills, you could drop in like 2-3 sentences and give me that micro pitch. And again, it's kind of like, how would I explain you to someone else after I've read this resume? But I think it's like a very strong resume.
Great, thank you.
Yep. All right, I gotta go eat some lunch. Go do some other shit today. See y'all soon. Oh, we recorded all this too, so there we go. Well, now you'll live on in infamy of our real-time resume. Real-time resume.